Hello and welcome to the RotD Deep Dive spoiler-filled discussion on 13 Sins. The issue that I really had with this movie, and I think one of the pitfalls of these kind of character out of his element, being manipulated, cat and mouse kind of movies, is I think that ultimately what it comes down to is when you have a movie like this, the nature of what's going on needs to be simple. And by that I mean that what is actually, pulling the strings at the very core of it needs to be simple. And the method of execution and the method of manipulation can be complex, and it's better for it because it does add elements of mystery, misdirect, and so on. I'm going to be making some comparisons with the 1990s movie The Game, and I am going to warn you ahead of time that I'm going to do my best to try to avoid particular spoilers. I'm not going to say exactly what's happening at the end, but I am going to give kind of an overarching comparison, and I think so. Just take that for what you will. I'm really going to try and avoid major spoilers because I do want, if somebody watches a deep dive discussion video and expects spoilers for the movie that I'm discussing, I kind of want to laser line focus spoilers on that. I don't want to ruin anybody else's movie time experience for any other movie. But the nature of The Game was simple. It had a conclusion, it was simple, and its method of execution for making that happen was obviously multi-layered, obviously complex, obviously very, took a lot of organizational meetings, but the nature of it was simple. And the nature of this one was not. And when it started to go down the territory of centuries-wide, worldwide, grand, secret, hidden, robed organization kind of thing, that for me kind of broke some elements to it. It broke believability, it broke immersion, and I think that they could have done things better if it had been simpler. And there's certain categories of movies that I think work within the context of a more complex behind the scenes kind of setting, but I think that there's some that work better on a simpler nature. And I think that this is a type of movie that works better on a simpler nature. I think that slasher films are another one that work better on a simpler nature. The more you try to dive into what's going on, and the more you try to come up with backstory and explanation, the less scary it becomes. And I think that's the nature of a lot of horror movies, is the more you explain it, the less scary it becomes, because a lot of the fear comes from the unknown. And with the slasher film, let's just take the original Halloween versus the Rob Zombie remake of Halloween, which I do like some elements of that. I do like some of the character development of that. However, just for scares alone, John Carpenter's blew it out of the water just because it was that simple. The character was who he was. There was no real explanation for it. He was just faceless, voiceless, and evil, and that was it. And the nature of home invasion movies, I think, also work on a better level than that. I think it was The Strangers, where the question, why are you doing this to us? Because you were home. Super simple. And I think that simplicity of it makes it all the more terrifying. It wasn't a grand, well, your husband engaged in bank transactions back in 15 years ago, which ruined my husband, and so on, and I started this level of planning and careful. No, you were home. This is what we do. And that is scary. So I think this cat and mouse thing, it ultimately does need to go on a simpler level than that. When you start bringing worldwide conspiracy into it, it just starts to lose its punch. That's just my opinion of it. Now, I do want to go over something that I thought worked really, really well in this movie, and that is the voice. The game show-esque total apathy to any emotional turmoil that the character is going through. I thought that voice worked really well, the voice that was guiding him over the phone. That was an element of this, just the way that they portrayed that. And that had to have been a very conscious thing when they started the recording sessions and the direction, and even down, maybe down to the writing element of it. Congratulations, Mr. Duh. You need to torture this person, or you don't want to do that, well, then you lose the money. And just, I thought that was a really, really strong element to the movie. It really kept me engaged, and I can't really get a beat on why, but I think that level of disconnect between the antagonist and the protagonist's emotional vulnerability at the moment was superb, and I really did enjoy that facet of the movie. How it wound up, I liked the ending. I liked the 13th sin, and I liked how it went about executing it. Honestly, if I was to come up with a major complaint, it would be the very, very ending. The fact that, he forfeited everything, and he killed Ron Perlman, and the very, very ending, I think, was a little bit of a letdown, and I'm really not entirely certain why. To be perfectly honest, I really can't explain why. I think at some point you start rooting for the darker nature of a protagonist, and I think it has some element that, let's take Breaking Bad for example. The first time I watched that movie, or that show, I was extraordinarily annoyed with the Skyler character, and the reason for that is because I was rooting for the darker part of the protagonist, of Walter White. As he was going through his journey of Breaking Bad, I was rooting for him to succeed in his darker endeavors. And I saw her as a force that was stopping him or inhibiting him at every step, questioning his judgments, questioning him, and what was going on in his life, and just generally being a pain in the neck. And I think on second viewing or third viewing, it becomes a bit of a different beast. But throughout this movie, I was engaged enough with the protagonist and what he was going through that I was invested in the character. And it's not that I wanted to see him take a downfall and go down a dark path of which there was no, coming back from. But at some point, I did become invested in him winning the game and getting the money. And I know that it was a balance between saving his soul versus getting rich and so on and so forth. But I think that also puts a little bit too much of a black and white element on it, that, he had done the deeds. All he needed to do was nothing. Maybe that's what it was. Maybe it was the fact that walking away was a inactive step, whereas forfeiting was an active step. And maybe if it had been the other way around, if there was something where he would need to take further action in order to gain things, or he could walk away and forfeit, maybe it would have been a different thing. But by that point, I was invested in him winning, invested in him taking the money, and the movie just really set that up for me, and that's what had me rooting for. And it was an inactive step for that to happen, and he took an actionable step to break it. So for me, that was an issue. But ultimately, I did enjoy the movie, and I thought it was an interesting little thrill ride. If I had one more criticism, and I know I'm getting a little short on time here, we're already at 9 minutes, 20 some odd seconds in, but I'm just going to cover this really quickly, and I think it kind of comes full circle back to the beginning of what I was talking about with the simplicity of things. When you have a faceless antagonist such as this, the notion of it being this worldwide conspiracy, and with unlimited resources and unlimited knowledge and unlimited funds and unlimited unlimited eyes everywhere, it stacks it against the protagonist in a way that is it starts to become uninteresting for the viewer, that you know that whatever they're going to be going through, that it's going to not work for them. That, and the nature of this kind of movie also has its interesting points for that too, because that element really doesn't work in any other type of movie. But when you have something like this, it kind of does in a way, because the protagonist has a way out, and that's through. The antagonist gives them a clear goal and a clear path to victory. And in this case, it honored it until he took his last steps. So I don't know. I think that by having it so complex and having it so uber powerful on the faceless antagonist, it distracted a bit, but at the same time, it also kind of works for a movie like this, because it does have a structure for the for the character to make it through. So yeah, I guess that's I wound up full circle in the middle of nowhere. Regardless, I did enjoy the movie, and it kind of had me on the edge of my seat in certain places, and it had me peeking through some fingers at certain places, and ultimately it had me caring about what the character was going through in many places. And overall, I would say that it is something that I would recommend, and I did enjoy it. So that should about do it for this deep dive discussion. If you agree with me, if you disagree with me on any of these topics, if you'd like to have a conversation about this movie, then I welcome you to leave some comments down below. I'll be reading them and responding to them, and would love to engage with you. So that should about do it for today's RotD, and that's about it. Thank you very much for joining me.